So imagine this. You are at the absolute peak of your industry. You're not just a CEO. You're a legend, a titan, hailed as a corporate savior. And then, just like that, it's all gone. That, in a nutshell, is the story of Nissan. It's a story about a company that was saved by a miracle cure that eventually turned toxic, leading to one of the most unbelievable corporate meltdowns you'll ever see. All right, let's get into it. On November 19, 2018, this was the shocking new reality for Carlos Ghosn, the larger-than-life CEO of the Renault-Nissan alliance. He steps off his private jet in Tokyo and is immediately arrested on the tarmac. The Ghosn shock, as they called it, was a massive global headline. It was this incredible drama filled with accusations of a palace coup, and it ended with a Hollywood-style escape from Japan. In a box meant for musical equipment, you just can't make this stuff up. And the story was just irresistible, right? But what if the arrest of this global icon wasn't actually the start of Nissan's problems? What if it was just the moment a sickness that had been hiding deep inside the company for years finally became too violent to ignore? That's the real story we're going to unpack here. To really understand how Nissan lost its way so badly, we have to rewind the clock. We've got to go all the way back to the moment it was supposedly saved. The year is 1999, and Nissan isn't just struggling. It's on the verge of complete and total collapse. The numbers were just staggering. The company was drowning under more than $20 billion of debt from its car business alone. It had posted losses for 7 of the previous 8 years. I mean, this wasn't just a rough patch. It was an anchor, and it was pulling the entire company down into the abyss. And you could literally see this failure on the streets. In the United States, which was a market that Nissan once helped define for all Japanese brands, its sales had just collapsed by a catastrophic 25% from their peak. Their cars, they'd become bland, totally forgettable. The brand had just lost its soul. But the real sickness, the real poison, was on the inside. The corporate culture was a textbook case of paralysis. You had departments that didn't talk to each other, bold ideas were just suffocated by endless meetings, and taking a risk, that was the fastest way to kill your career. So this wasn't just a financial crisis, it was a total crisis of identity. So into this completely hopeless situation walks an outsider, a gaijin, Carlos Ghosn. He was sent by Renault, which had just bought a huge stake in Nissan, and he had this reputation as the cost killer, a ruthless, brutally effective turnaround artist. He was exactly the shock to the system that Nissan so desperately needed.
In October of '99, Ghosn gets up on a stage and unveils his Nissan revival plan. And honestly, it was like corporate surgery without any anesthetic. He announced he was going to cut 21,000 jobs, close 5 factories in Japan, and take a sledgehammer to the traditions that had paralyzed the company. He even promised he would resign if Nissan wasn't profitable within 1 year. The audacity was incredible.
And one move in particular was just culturally explosive, dismantling the keiretsu system. You have to understand, this was the bedrock of Japanese industry, these interwoven webs of suppliers built on loyalty and tradition, not necessarily price or performance. Ghosn saw it as a massive inefficiency, and by attacking it, he was attacking the very fabric of Japanese business. It earned him the nickname Keiretsu Killer. And you know what? The plan worked, and it worked astonishingly fast. But its success depended entirely on Ghosn's absolute authority. He was an autocrat. His word was law. Now, at the time, that was necessary, but it planted the very first seed of the future crisis. It created a culture totally dependent on one man. The cult of Ghosn was born. But Ghosn knew you can't just shrink your way to greatness. So for a brief, glorious period, Nissan became cool again. The 350Z brought back the spirit of an absolute icon. The Murano basically invented the stylish crossover segment we see everywhere today, and the Infiniti FX was so far ahead of its time, it was called the Porsche Macan, a decade before the Macan even existed. This is what cemented Ghosn's status as a legend. This incredible success, though, it fueled a kind of hubris that would lead directly to the next and far more destructive phase of this story. The focus shifted from quality to quantity, and the very cure that had saved Nissan began to turn toxic. In 2011, Ghosn announced this new plan called Nissan Power 88. The goal was simple and it was brutal. Achieve 8% global market share and an 8% profit margin. And this is the crucial point. The focus was no longer on making great, innovative cars. It was about hitting a number. It was about volume, at any cost. This was basically a declaration of war on the company's own brand.
So while the brand was kind of rotting in public, the company itself was rotting from within. The core problem was the completely lopsided nature of the alliance. See, Renault held a controlling, voting stake in Nissan, but Nissan, which by this point was the bigger, more profitable company, had zero voting rights in Renault. You can imagine the deep resentment this created among Nissan's Japanese executives.
Tensions finally boiled over in 2015. The French government used a new law to double its voting rights in Renault, which effectively tightened its control over Nissan. To the executives back in Japan, this felt like a hostile act. It confirmed their deepest fears of a full French takeover, and it solidified their belief that the only way to save their company was to get rid of Carlos Ghosn.
And that brings us right back to that fateful night in November 2018. Ghosn's arrest wasn't some random act of justice. No, it was a meticulously planned palace coup, orchestrated by his own hand-picked successor. The savior had fallen, and an era of just unprecedented chaos was about to be unleashed.
The aftermath was just a total power vacuum. The company went into a violent freefall. The CEO who led the coup, he was forced to resign over his own pay scandal. A series of desperate turnaround plans came and went, all failing. The company was just lurching from one crisis to the next, totally adrift. Now you might think, well, every car maker has struggled. But Nissan's collapse was so much deeper, and it was so self-inflicted. Nowhere was this more brutal than in China. Between 2018 and 2023, their sales were nearly cut in half. Chinese buyers were flocking to domestic EV brands, leaving Nissan's aging lineup in the dust, looking like a relic from another era. And that brings us pretty much to today. After years of painful negotiations, the alliance was finally rebalanced. Nissan got the autonomy it always craved, but it was left smaller and much, much weaker. And with nowhere left to turn, the company announced its most drastic survival plan yet, Nissan. The entire tragic story has now come full circle. Just look at this comparison. The new plan uses the exact same brutal tactics that Ghosn used back in 1999, mass layoffs, factory closures. But here's the kicker. Where the first plan was for revival and growth, Nissan is a plan for pure survival. It's a plan for managed decline.
So what are the big takeaways from this whole corporate tragedy? Well, you've got a dysfunctional alliance that bred resentment, a catastrophic loss of the innovative spirit that once made them great, a culture of chaos and paralysis, and that disastrous shift from making great cars to just blindly chasing a number. The very cure that saved Nissan ultimately sowed the seeds of its own destruction.
Which leaves us with one final, really sobering question. As Nissan fights for its life today with a plan that's a chilling echo of its past, are we watching the blueprint for a second, genuine revival, or are we simply bearing witness to the slow, managed decline of a fallen titan?